So the opening words are from Savante Pabo. Science is far from the objective and impartial search for incontrovertible truths that non-scientists might imagine. It is in fact a social endeavor where dominating personalities and disciples of often defunct yet influential scholars determine what is common knowledge. So I look forward to hearing his program, Mindfulness, Neanderthals, and the Terror of Obscurity. Monte?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I should start by saying that I'm someone who struggles with social anxiety. So my heart rate's probably about 150 right now, and I'm going to do my best to convey this talk. But that said, it's actually a real treat, a real honor to have all of your time and to share some of my perspectives. I am not an expert in Neanderthals, nor am I truly an expert in mindfulness, possibly an expert in terror. So I want this to, in a sense, as I was working on this, I realized it was going to be a continuation of, I gave one other talk here, and that was about plants. And in that talk, I went over how, at a very basic level, we are completely dependent on plants. All of life on Earth comes about from the energy of the sun, and we can't collect that energy by going to the beach. The plants collect it for us, and all of our food and our life is possible because of plants. That's the kind of connection that you'd think we wouldn't forget about. But interestingly, it's actually very easy to do as a human in this particular society. And there is no technology that can do what plants do. And even though we sometimes think that maybe we'll come up with something. How does mindfulness fit into this? Mindfulness is a practice that I've used a lot in my lifetime because of what I referenced in the beginning of the talk. Intense anxiety, fear, it's very difficult to live with, and you search for an answer, you search for a solution. And mindfulness is a way of exploring your blind spots, of becoming more awake. When you walk into someone else's house, you can be extremely aware of almost everything that's different from your house. It's a completely new experience. Or when you come back home after a long vacation, you can experience your own home in a different way, because when we are exposed to something over and over again, it becomes familiar, and actually it's like our minds start to block things that are deemed details and parts of the experience that are deemed unimportant. And a practice of mindfulness is about attempting to wake up inside the extremely familiar. So my talk about plants was all about that, because plants are all around us. Trees, grass, our crops. But how can we look at it in a way that we bring back the appreciation and the respect for that process that's not just a matter of us selfishly sort of profiting from, but actually a connection that goes back an incredibly long time. It's something we learn in a basic biology class about our respiration and the respiration of the plants and how that's a balance. But it's actually fundamental in the same way that, for instance, your liver and your heart are both necessary to keep you alive, and they're necessary to keep each other alive. They do very different things, but they're connected in a way that goes beyond just dependency, in the sense that you are one creature. And mindfulness can help to take what is obscure and make it visible. Obscurity. This is one of those terrors I talked about. I don't mean to make too big of a deal about it, but for me, I have had moments in my life where I thought, what have I really done? Have I had a significant impact? And this is what I was referencing when I was talking about the terror of obscurity. Feeling unrecognized, not valuable, and not important. I do think that that's probably more common in our day and age, because part of what gives us value and part of what sustains me and gives me value is emotional community. People that I care about, people that witness me. And our societies are so huge now that sometimes you're part of sort of a larger machine, and it can be difficult to get that same experience of value. I wrote, someone needs to be the janitor, someone needs to be the barista, someone needs to harvest the tulips or assemble your phone. And I was thinking about class distinctions when I wrote, no one should go an entire lifetime without cleaning a bathroom. Bringing mindfulness to obscurity is to not run from the feeling. What is my life coming to? The thought comes, there's a twinge of emotion, and then maybe anger, defensiveness, or sadness. But if we're gentle as we can be with ourselves, mindfulness can actually bring healing. It is no easy thing to be a human. To remember glimpses of the past and have only guesses about the future. We come into the world vulnerable, and we stay vulnerable, but we get better at it. We have no exoskeleton, no claws. We have creativity and use it to defend ourselves from physical harm and emotional harm. Mindfulness involves feeling the vulnerability, acknowledging the lack of control, temporarily setting down the defenses, seeing and listening. I have only a short time on the earth and speaking. What will be my impact, and who will remember me? Maybe some future humanoid race will find my bones, make up a story about me, and then project their shadowy feelings into me. There's a fun quote I like from a Bob Dylan song that says, the only thing we know about Henry Porter is that his name wasn't Henry Porter. When I first heard that line, I didn't get it. But after a while, I realized it highlighted obscurity as we look at the past, as I look back at my grandparents and my great-grandparents or people in history, how much do I actually really know about them? I might know their name, I might know a couple of things that they did, I might have a few stories about them, but most of it is actually unknown. And I feel that way about Neanderthals. Which I want to say, Neanderthal is probably not what they called themselves. Ever since the first discovery of Neanderthal fossils in 1856 in the Neander Valley in Germany, the species has occupied an ambiguous relationship to humans. Neanderthals are the closest species to humans, and their location on the spectrum between humans and other animals has constantly been contested. For the first century after their discovery, they were typically imagined as highly non-human creatures. Their primitive aspects emphasized to such an extent that they became known as brutes, who couldn't even stand up straight. Now, this last couple paragraphs I actually got off of a website, and it succinctly describes something I was trying to get across. Because I find the most interesting thing about Neanderthals, which isn't really about them, it's about us, that as I was growing up, they were always portrayed as strikingly primitive. There were a lot of questions. It was believed for the longest time that they didn't have the ability to use language, that they had no artwork, that, to my mind, and I'm not a scientist, this is just my perspective, they were being used as a kind of comparison to us, which is unfortunate because they're not here and they don't have a marketing department to come to their defense. But then, in 2012 or so, Svante Pabo and his team in Germany, actually were able to, after decades of trying, recover a significant amount of DNA from a Neanderthal bone. And after they analyzed it, and they compared it to modern humans, they found out that modern humans contain DNA from Neanderthals. After that happened, what I started hearing more and more from the science about Neanderthals was basically granting them human qualities. Instead of being used to distance ourselves from the animal kingdom, I liken it to if there's an individual in your small community that you consider a fool and you've been making fun of most of your life, and then you find out that they're actually your grandfather, you may take a serious reappraisal of what you think about that person, because now it reflects on you. The most interesting part of that is I think it unveils that all of us, scientists included, even when we're trying to be very objective, are still heavily influenced by the need to tweak information in ways that make us feel more comfortable. So the truth is, this is just my personal opinion, they say Neanderthals went extinct. But can you really say they went extinct when their descendants are still here? So I honestly think they're still being used in a way that we find fitting or useful on a larger story scale. The average European or Asian has between, on average, 1% to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Again, I'm just going to offer some of my opinion. I'm not a scientist, but they've been extinct for believed about 40,000 years. And the way that genetics works is if there's a minority contribution in a community, the overall process of genetics over the generations is like a blender. So if there's a very small amount of a certain genetic trait, over time, it will usually disappear unless there's some particular advantage that it gives. And so if we project back in time, the contribution of Neanderthal DNA to the modern human is probably much, much larger, and over time is declining. The Iceman, Otzi, found in the Alps, died about 3300 BC. And they were able to decode his genome, and he's actually contains about 5.5% Neanderthal, which is more than any living human tested, which is an indication that perhaps as you go back in time, the percentages were greater. And so it's even possible to me that they didn't actually die out in some kind of dramatic event, but that essentially, we overpopulated them and intermingled, and there's nobody around anymore who distinctly resembles a Neanderthal. Neanderthals may have made other contributions to our traditions and culture that we could never trace. In many cases, when we're thinking about our ancestors and hopefully experiencing some measure of gratitude, and also our, what I call our ancillary ancestors, which is those who lived with and contributed to our lives in ways we can't imagine. And in many ways, we often don't know who to thank. I had a memorable conversation. I had a friend when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And we used to talk about some pretty deep stuff for that age. And he thought that the best you could do in life was to be famous and to be remembered. And my take was that even if you're remembered, you won't be around to appreciate it. And so the best you could do is make a positive contribution and hope for the best. And that conversation still kind of rings in my mind because his opinion, I think, is unconsciously accepted by a large amount of people. That it's very important to be societally significant in some way, to have recognition, ideally to have credentials after your name, and then above that to be, publicized, and above that to be famous. And I can't say it from experience because I've never been famous, but from my own personal careful observation, I don't think that road leads anywhere. And so then how do we deal with obscurity? How do we deal with not meeting that standard? And what I came to last night, as I was working on this again, as I was doing this talk in my mind for the 100th time, was that it's about connection. Is that this all ties together. The way that science looked at Neanderthals was in a disconnected way. They're different from us. Let's look at the differences between us. And specifically, let's look at how the differences between us make us look good. But actually, we find out that we're connected to them. We're connected to them in a very, very intrinsic way. And this feeling of obscurity is actually about disconnection too. If I have emotional connections with people in my life and with my community, that's where my sense of value can come from, where I'm witnessing them and they're witnessing me. They're just like the plants. And if you begin to believe that you are an isolated, single entity, apart from all the processes that actually sustain you, of course, that leads to, potentially, it leads to a kind of despair. And I don't think we need to think about mindfulness as a separate thing. Mindfulness is part of the process that we go through every day. Many people have great insights while they're getting ready in the morning, shaving or washing their hair. And this is maybe because in that moment there's a little bit of emptiness into which can flow an insight. But I have to admit that it seems like mindfulness is kind of under assault. This quality of attention, of awakeness, of being open. We now have more ways to distract ourselves than ever before. Smartphones, on-demand TV, video games. Yes, I do participate in these things. And barrages of information, both life-supporting and life-draining. But I think it's an opportunity for us. There's always an opportunity for us to open up that connection to our sources. That can be incredibly healing. The plants can be some of the best teachers for human beings, actually. About what's important: light, water, healthy soil, and balance, growing your root system, reaching up to the sky, not to be afraid of death, as it's part of the cycle, and do your best to prepare the seeds of the next generation. And that's my end.
But look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. The earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. Like it or not, for the moment the earth is where we make our stand. There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and preserve and cherish the pale blue dot that only home we've ever known.